Thanks everybody for joining us. You're here for Sales Intel and Bonsai. We're presenting on virtual event best practices, how to increase event source pipeline. So you have with you today, I'm Jason Hubbard. I'm Vice President of Partnerships and Alliances here at Sales Intel. And we have Corinne here with us, Director of Marketing from Bonsai. Corinne, welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Jason. Excited to be here.
Great. All right, so quick agenda. Talk really briefly about how to get organizational alignment. Crucial to be able to have to a successful event, whether it's virtual or in person, to get that alignment out of the way at first. Otherwise, you're going to handicap yourself and going to be virtually impossible to have a successful event. Next up, we'll talk about how to properly identify your virtual event audience. Next, we'll talk about how to produce events for different stages of your buyer's journey. And then last off, we'll wrap up with how to get the most out of on-demand and no-show registrations. So, I mean, this topic's really close to my heart. Obviously, for Corinne over at Bonsai, they help you drive registrations for events. So very close to them as well. So, like a lot of you, whenever COVID hit back in March, we were gearing up for a really heavy event season. So we had, I think, 9 events that we were planning on sponsoring or attending. So I mean, we had done everything. We had booths ready, we had travel reservations, we had swag, you name it, we were ready. And you know, that was going to be our spring into the summer, and then kick back off in the fall. And obviously, us, like everybody else, that changed really quickly. I know for you guys, Corinne, you were talking about, you know, a lot of your focus used to be in person, so you guys had to do a bit of a pivot to really focus on virtual. How did that really kind of go for you?
Yeah, it was pretty intense, right? So our customers, as a marketing team, we were hosting mostly webinars. So that was a pretty natural shift to hosting maybe a few more, but our customers were mostly in-person events. So we had to shift in terms of how we supported them in driving attendance and driving registrations to now their virtual events. And all of a sudden there were so many virtual events. So it was definitely a really big shift. But what we've learned is that, you know, virtual events are not going away. And this shift has allowed it to really become more of a priority. We actually did a recent survey, just kind of an informal LinkedIn survey, and we found that 55% said that virtual events are very important to creating incremental pipeline. And then we also did one that said 83% said that hybrid events will be the future for them. So no matter what, virtual events are going to be something that they do.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So yeah, a lot of stuff's going to go for both virtual as well as in person. But regardless of any type of event that you're doing, you got to make sure you've got alignment across your departments internally, as well as make sure you've got all the pieces together to be able to maximize and do the most out of the event that you just did. So some important questions to ask. You know, who's needed for the event? Have they been brought in during the planning period? What are goals? How do you gauge success? What are your metrics and KPIs? And then, as Corinne said, virtual events are going to be the way you know, here for the foreseeable future. Corinne, what are some of the keys that you see or that you talk to customers about as far as departments, leadership, stuff like that, that you really encourage them to have as part of this?
Yeah, so what we suggest, and even internally, what we do when we're producing events, so we try to produce 2 to 3 webinars a month. And we look at kind of having that like DAISY framework. So it's the driver, the approver, the contributor, and the informed. And the idea there is that you just kind of get your key stakeholders, you understand who owns what, who just kind of needs to be in the know, and who is really driving for the event. So for us, like the driver is kind of that producer or that event marketing manager, maybe that field marketing manager. The approver is probably your leadership team. People that kind of need to know what's going on, have the final say, they have the budget sign off, all of that good stuff. The contributors are really, you know, your SDRs, your BDRs, your marketing ops teams, your field marketing, anyone that's going to also play a role in driving registrations. And then of course, informed That could be, I mean, that could be huge. That could be the whole company, anyone you want to be sharing about your event on LinkedIn, but it's your sales, your AEs, your customer success managers. Everyone really plays a role. But I think it's important to understand how big of a role they play in each event. And it's really that, that producer and those contributors that you're looking to for support for each virtual experience.
Right. And then, yeah, on the goals and KPI side, I mean, obviously everybody focuses on, how many people did you have register? How many form fills did you have? How many people actually showed up? But for me, at least, and I strongly encourage anybody I talk to that's trying to look at this, you need to look beyond that. And that'll segue nicely into some of our later stuff in here. But figure out what those goals are above and beyond just those top of the funnel metrics, and know like who your audience is and what you're trying to drive them towards. And crucial to that is being able to identify the audience that you're wanting to target. So you've got to find a happy medium. You need a broad enough target audience to be able to drive enough registrants to make this be worth your time and effort. But you also want to generate quality people out of that. You don't want to generate a whole bunch of volume that then is going to almost all be disqualified and burn a lot of the time of your SDRs and account executives. And so you've got to find that nice mix, but you also have to figure out like what is your ultimate goal there? Are you trying to drive brand awareness? Are you trying to educate? Are you trying to convert? Are you trying to retain? Because a lot of that will have an impact on who your audience is, as well as how big of an audience that you're aiming for. At the end of the day, like it's marketing. It's going to come down to a numbers game.
Yeah, I think it's really easy for us, especially with virtual events, to want to just like you kind of that spray and pray idea, right? Like we just want people to attend. We want to see those numbers. It's like great to see the attendance numbers shoot up while the webinar is happening. But is that really what's needed for this specific event? And I think, like you said, it comes down to like, what is the goal of the event? Is it that awareness? And we'll talk a little bit about that. Is it maybe that decision stage event? Because if it's a decision stage, then your audience is actually going to be very targeted. And what was great about in-person events is that was kind of decided for you, right? Depending on your region, what type of event you were doing. If you're doing a road show, a dinner, you knew you could only have, 15 to 20 people show up. And so that was great. But now with regional events, you could have people from virtual events, you could have people from all over the world, really. And so that can be tempting. So I think it's really important to keep that target audience in mind, and be very targeted like you would for regional events, because like you don't want to wear down your audience. You don't want to spam them. And that can be kind of easy to do when you're producing multiple events a month.
Yeah, I mean, for a lot of people, especially ones that are used to doing, in-person events being put on by somebody else, in particular, if you're doing your own virtual events, whether it's webinars, whether it's stuff that you're doing in partnership, whatever, for a lot of people, it may be the first time that they're having to do the upfront qualification. So for a lot of people, that are used to doing in-person events, like most of that qualification is being done by the person putting the event on. I know for us, whenever I was at my previous company, Cirrus Insight, like our ICP was anybody using Salesforce. So whenever we flew out to Dreamforce to sponsor Dreamforce, we knew anybody that had the budget and the time off work to come out to San Francisco and drop, $5,000-$10,000 to attend Dreamforce was somebody we needed to be talking to. So like we didn't really care about qualification beyond the fact they were there. Versus, especially if you're putting on your own event, you're responsible for figuring out your targeting and knowing who that is. And so, it's important to think through that, especially for a lot of people that may be doing that for the first time.
Yeah, definitely.
So yeah, to the numbers game piece of it, some general stats around this based off of what audience you're aiming at. So, net new cold, you're going to have somewhere typically between a 1 to 3% registration rate, 20 to 30% attendance rate. Warm leads and prospects, 3 to 5%, 40 to 50% attendance. Customers or past attendees, 5+%, 60, 70%. For me, it's pretty remarkable how consistent these numbers are. But it also gives you a good way to look at it is, if you know kind of how warm your audience is, and you have a total number that you're looking for to come out the other end of it, then it gives you a good idea of how many you need to be promoting to on the top end of it, as well as how many touches need to be involved in it. So you can actually get pretty scientific and mathematical about it.
Yeah, it's all about working backwards, right? Someone asked on the chat, like, what, if our numbers only close sales, like that's all that leadership cares about. Well, what is that number and what does it take to get to that number? And I think that then kind of informs the type of events you're putting on, and it informs what those goals are.
Yeah, I mean, if you get really, really good at it, then you can get all the way down to, what your conversion rates are, what your ACV is on those. And so if you've got a cost structure involved with it, if you're doing like we did a couple of weeks ago and sponsoring AAISP's virtual event, something like that, like you can come into it knowing what your ROI you're aiming for is. And based off of conversion rate and ACV for those, you can back into, okay, we need to get this many registrations for this in order to hit our ROI. So again, you can get really, really scientific with this.
Yeah.
All right, so we alluded to this part, but a great strategy is to build your event based off of the stage or next step you're wanting people to take in the funnel. So I mean, it's just like advanced content strategies, period. Virtual events being another piece of that. You want to make sure it's designed for the stage and the audience that you're wanting to target. So things like, are you trying to drive awareness? Are you trying to drive consideration? Are you trying to drive them to a decision? Is this top of the funnel lead generation just to build the pipeline? Or are you trying to aim something further down where you want to dig into use cases or case studies, how-tos, stuff like that. And then, and as you're seeing here, based off of where that is, you may not even want to talk about your actual product or service in the webinar, especially if it's something that's educational, value add, very top of the funnel. People tend to shy away from and get pissed off about, sitting through basically a product pitch, especially if it's been positioned as something that's thought leadership. And so you really need to think through what that is. I mean, and the flip side is, like, if you're somebody that's really wanting to evaluate a vendor or product and you're getting top of the funnel thought leadership stuff, you've got a major misalignment there. You're not going to connect with your audience. You're definitely not going to drive them to that next step that you're wanting them to take.
Yeah, I think it's we're also competing right now with so many other events. There's so much noise out there, and that you just need to be really smart with what you're doing. And then if you're able to get someone's attention, you want to make sure it's the right event, right? It's the right event for what stage they're at, where you want to be able to meet them where they are at. And I think that's just really important. We found that, like, awareness, it's really great. Those thought leadership pieces, panels like we're doing right now, or discussions like we're doing right now are really important. Consideration, we've seen the customer stories work really well, where you're hearing from the customers. I attended one webinar. It was a sales enablement team, and what they did is they kind of showed their tool, but with the thought leadership, right? It was just something that they never talked about their tool, but it was constantly kind of in the background, and they were showing how it was used. It was a content enablement platform. So that was really, really smart, and definitely like piqued my interest. And I felt like I walked away learning more, even though I don't have their tool, knowing, I'm a better now marketer. I've learned more things, but also I'm really interested in their tool. And then the decision stage, right? That's where you can be a little bit more heavy-handed with the product demos. Maybe that's in a virtual lunch and learn, something where you're having your product experts, subject matter experts lead the discussion. There's really creative ways to kind of go about, not just doing a webinar or a talking head, which can be, again, where you kind of automatically go to. So it's an interesting experience to try to get a little bit more creative with virtual events.
Yep. Which great segue into now, how do you actually do this successfully, both on the initial as well as the follow-up? I used to be a big person that harped on, especially for in-person events, if you have not done the majority of your marketing prior to an in-person event, I'm a big believer that your in-person event's already going to be a failure. If you just show up and you man a booth and you hope people stop by and talk to you, and then just plan on following up with those leads after the fact, it's unlikely that you're going to have enough volume, and certainly not enough qualified volume, to make that a worthwhile investment of your time and effort. And it's the same story for virtual events. I mean, clearly, if you're putting on your own virtual event, then you're responsible for driving those registrations. Nobody is just going to show up on their own if you don't promote it, and drive awareness around it. But even if you're doing something like I talked about, the AAISP event, that was one where they were responsible for the bulk of the marketing and driving people to it. But we put in a lot of effort in driving awareness and driving people to register for it and stuff like that. And that was instrumental to that event being successful, because we weren't just relying on people to show up to the event being sponsored by AAISP and then just happen to stumble upon us. We've done a lot of work around that. So, I mean, one of the biggest keys to it, you got to make sure you've got time. Even if we're doing something like a virtual webinar like we're doing right now, we typically give ourselves a cutoff and say, if we haven't nailed down partner topic and have everything together to build a registration page and begin promotion at least 4 to 6 weeks out, then we're gonna call off and say we can't do it, because we need that amount of time to not be rushed and to get proper amount of time to get touches out, drive awareness, get email campaigns out, get sales reps sharing it on LinkedIn, stuff like that. And so you got to give yourself time. You got to use a multi-channel approach. So it's not just having a mix of social and email and phone calls, but also multi-channel as far as who's sending it out. So don't just make it be your marketing team. Have your sales team leverage this. Have your success team leverage it, depending on what the topic is and where it's targeted at. And then another big one, I mean, we showed in the earlier slide, attendance rates. In a lot of ways, especially for webinars, we're all a victim of our own best practices. Everybody records their webinar now. Everybody sends out a link to the recording afterwards. And so there's not a lot of incentive to show up to the webinar, apart from if you think you're going to have actual questions to ask. Otherwise, the link's going to be coming. You can watch it whenever you want. You can watch it at 1.5, 2 times speed, get through it quicker. You can fast forward through the stuff that you're not interested in. And so, it used to be a really solid rule of thumb. 40–50% of your top of the funnel webinar registrants were going to show up. Now it's 20 to 30%. And so what are some things you do to try and get people to actually show up and be engaged? You can offer incentives. You can offer gift cards, t-shirts. You can do surveys. You can give away electronic collateral like an ebook or a white paper, something like that. So get creative about your ways of trying to get people to actually show up, not just register. And then on the follow-up side, I mean, same idea. You can leverage things like follow-up surveys. This is a great tool. You can use it, you can leverage it 2 ways. One is a great way to further qualify those registrants, be able to identify the ones that are really qualified. You may want to send directly to your SDR team. But you can also potentially use that as a way to gather intelligence that you might be able to then put together for an industry analysis piece or a white paper, or a premium piece of gated content that you can use for additional lead gen around it. Make sure you've got relevant content for follow-up, so that you're not just doing the typical sales follow-up. Find additional ways to have value add. Oftentimes your events are going to have a clear topic or pain point or use case. And so either build out content in advance or go into your content library and be able to figure out what stuff that's going to be applicable and might be interesting. And then of course the kind of no-brainer for most people is make sure you hand off to sales. Do as much qualification ahead of time as you can, but don't have people come to an event and then just cross your fingers and hope that they're going to come fill out a form for pricing or for a demo or something like that. Like take the initiative, actually reach out to them and do the work.
Yeah, totally. So it's been kind of interesting. We did a kind of another informal poll because about that pre-event marketing and that outreach. So it was really interesting to hear that you guys stick to that 4 to 6 weeks, and I think that's really great. But there are people that we had 29% say that they did 2 weeks out with webinars. So there's definitely people that are cutting it a little bit closer. But also attention is so different, right? Attention span, inboxes are getting cluttered with event invites every week. Like we're seeing, I think I see 16 to 20 event invites every week. So you wonder too if there's a little bit of a science there with, being able to capture people's attention when an event is about to happen. And then for us, our channels too, like email, is so important. It's not going to go away anytime soon. But we also drink our own champagne. We love to utilize Bonsai. But of course, there's social, there's targeted ads. There's so many ways to be getting the word out. We've also found a lot of success in community. So it's a little bit more organic. It takes a little bit more of a lift, but finding communities where your audience is and being there, especially with top of funnel awareness events, showing that that your company, that your product is there to help, that you're here to help advance the industry, share best practices. That could play really well in communities where you're not really pushing your product. And we tend to see, 10 to 15, it's not a huge number, but 10 to 15 registrations that come from communities alone. So they definitely can play a role. And I think it's definitely something to look into. And then with the content, we also find a lot of value. We try, at almost every webinar, if we can, to transcribe it, to get it on the blog. I think there's a lot of value there. It's a great way to share your on-demand link. But also there's SEO value there. There's other content value there. So thinking about how to expand your webinar or your virtual experience to be so much more than just this kind of registration tool. So that's just some of the things that we kind of do with our monthly webinars.
Yeah, and I was, like I said, we sort of shoot ourselves in the foot a little bit on the attendance side by recording it, but the flip side of it is you got to keep in mind, if you're leveraging it correctly, then that recording, well, one, if it's good enough as far as the content, the partner, whoever you have as speaker, whatever, you can also always gate that recording for additional registrations down the road. But it's also a fantastic piece of collateral that you can then hand over to your sales team to be able to do to send out as they're having conversations. So especially if you're going over like a use case or a pain point or something like that, it's something that as head of partnerships here, I really focus on doing partner webinars like this where we can dig into content around a combined use case. And then anytime my reps encounter somebody that is either evaluating or customer of that partner, now they've got a really fantastic piece of content they can then surface and send out to them.
Yeah, and maybe take the extra step and time code it, right?
Yep.
If it's a half-hour webinar or an hour webinar, and then, oh my gosh, you're giving them just gold where they can go to their prospects and say, hey, at 10 minutes and 32 seconds, we talked about this, and I thought you would find this very valuable.
Yep. So I won't go through this in too much detail. Like I said, we'll have the link to the deck up. But this is an example of a time frame and steps that you would take to promote and get ready for a webinar. So this would be something typical that we would do or try and follow at least at bare bones, and then build out around additional things specific to that webinar. But ideas for how to structure that outreach.
Do you still do like a week before reminder, or has that changed?
Well, so we'll do the week before reminder is not going to be necessarily for the people that have registered. It's like the week before, hey, this is coming up this week. You've got 2 days to register or something like that.
Yeah.
And typically we'll do the day before and then an hour before for the people that actually registered.
Yeah, that's what we're finding too, is that week before reminder is just going to get, no one's going to pay attention. And now, like, everyone is so busy. It's that day before, it's maybe that hour before. Those are the reminders that are going to get people to make sure it's on their calendar and attend.
Yeah, the week before one is sort of our last chance to try and drive those last registrations. All right. Well, we've got a few minutes here for Q&A. Looks like we already have a few questions in here. Ryan asked, when it comes down to numbers, what numbers are you looking at? So he's saying he works at a small IT consultancy, and leadership wants closed sales. It's the only number that means anything to them. And so yeah, I mean, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but yeah, I mean, you design it based around what your conversion is that you need. So for you, you're needing sales. So you know, I would focus on content and an audience that's further down the funnel, at least out the gate, so that you've got some easy wins under your belt. You can take the leadership and justify the investment. Once you have that, then it makes it a little easier to pitch to them that, hey, we need to do stuff further up the funnel, so that we can build that pipeline. And that gives them a little bit more room to have a little bit of patience around how long that's going to take you to nurture and convert those, to be able to see revenue off of it. Because of course that stuff that's really high up the funnel can take you, you know, months, you know, sometimes 6, 9+ months to be able to get them fully nurtured, educated, and to actually convert off of that. But yeah, I mean, focus your content, your audience based off of what your goal is. And so for you, where your goal is driving people to convert and trying to drive revenue, if you can build a big enough audience, and that's the key to it, that's going to be engaged in that content further down the funnel, that's going to be your best bet. Corinne, anything to add there?
No, I think you're right on the money there. It's kind of that working backwards for your numbers and determining, you know, the right event type. So if it is really about closing deals, making sure the format supports that.
All right, and then question on incentives. So question, are company specific items more effective or company branded gift cards? So a few thoughts on that, and I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on this one, Corinne. My my feelings on branded tchotchke type things are, make sure whatever you're doing is something that you would actually personally want to have. Don't burn money on cheap junk that's just going to have your name on it and then get tossed. So, I mean, like in particular, any company I've ever marketed for, whenever it comes time to make t-shirts, I always insist on spending the money on the really extra soft, nice, heathered t-shirts. You know, don't get the cheap stuff that like nobody's actually going to want to wear. So like I even know like the manufacturing company, every time it's like, nope, go get it from Next Level. They've got the softest t-shirts you're ever going to find. And, you know, other things like you know, charging squids, those are super useful. Have everything all in one place. You've got you know, every type of plug that you would ever need all on one thing. You know, more expensive items like you know, charging battery banks, stuff like that. But you know, spend the money on something that's going to actually have value. But of course, a lot of that has changed since we're not doing in-person events now. So you know, shipping out a you know, huge box of something and paying that one shipping charge can be a whole lot more effective than breaking that out and having to pay for shipping for umpteen of those little things. And so that's where virtual stuff, or working, if you want to do actually direct mail pieces, working with you know, a company, you know, Sendoso is a you know, a customer of ours, also a partner of ours. That's what they specialize in, is sending incentives like that, and they can get really creative with a lot of that. But regardless, figure out something that's going to be valuable to them. Don't just do it because it's going to have your name on it. What are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think also if you can think about your event, like, can you create or send them something that is relevant to your event or relevant to what they're currently experiencing? So maybe you're sending them a work from home kit, or you're sending, you know, you're having an early morning webinar. So send them coffee, send them a nice Yeti mug, anything that kind of can tie in. I think this works really well too with that kind of consideration stage event, you know, where you're doing something a little bit more targeted. Maybe you're doing a lunch and learn, or a wine tasting event or cocktail event, right? You can send them that cocktail kit, send them those wines that they're going to be pairing and tasting, send them gift cards for lunch. So if you can kind of tie in whatever you're going to kind of incentivize them with your event, I think that goes a long way. Especially like if it's a lunch and learn and you're sending them that lunch gift card, for them to use during the event, they're probably more likely to attend and kind of go through all the steps they need to kind of earn that gift card.
Yeah, just because it's virtual does not mean that you can't make a special experience out of it. I mean, one of our partners specializes in getting small intimate groups together to do virtually to do bourbon tasting.
Yeah.
And so they'll send them a tasting kit. It'll have a custom hand blown glass. It'll have the bottle of bourbon. It'll have some stuff about it, maybe something to eat alongside it. And then you'll have an actual bourbon expert, bourbon sommelier, on it to talk through the tasting with them. And so you can still build like really, really great experiences, even doing it virtually. So again, I strongly encourage you to figure out something that's going to have value, that's going to connect. Also experiment. I mean, at Cirrus, we long story, but our spirit animal became a unicorn. And we started started ordering unicorn plushies that had a t-shirt with the logo on it. And I mean, we all thought they were cute, but I mean, people ate those things up. I mean, people would come by the booth and sign up for a demo just to get one. And people would send us, pictures of like out to lunch with their unicorn or like traveling with it and stuff like that. So, it was one of those things. It was like, that seems kind of cute. And I was like, okay, that really, really worked. So we're going to double down on that. But yeah, I mean, figure out stuff that people are actually going to connect with.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree.
All right, well, we're a few minutes over here. If anybody has any additional questions, like I said, we'll send out an email with a recap. Feel free to reply to that if you have anything for me or Corinne. But apart from that, thanks everybody for joining us today. This has been great. Corinne, thanks so much.
Yeah,
and
this is awesome.
all right, thanks guys.
Bye everyone.